Hello everyone, I'm Bruffy1322 and this video will showcase the lap times, top speeds and race tiers of all vehicles from the GTA 5 bottom dollar bounties update, including day 1 and drip feed vehicles plus today's new Vorschlag hammer. If you want to see all vehicles from all classes as well as more background on this testing as a whole, check the original testing videos in the playlist linked in the description and be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on future testing of new vehicles added to GTA 5 and beyond. So the first thing is to once again do a quick mention of the Impaler SZ, because although it was introduced with the previous DLC and has had no changes to its performance, it has changed its class from sedans to muscle. Also, there are some notable exceptions from this video, which is the Yosemite 1500 off-road truck and the police vehicles, which will all be seen in the new 2024 off-road and emergency vehicle videos respectively as soon as the retesting is complete for those classes. So this video serves as an update to the 2024 Supers, Sports, Muscle, Sports Classics, Coupes, Sedans and SUVs videos, and will sit above them in the testing playlist as we had new cars from each of those classes released from the bottom dollar bounties DLC. This video will allow you to see where these new vehicles place within those classes when you watch those original 2024 videos. For example, you can compare the lap time, top speed, class position and tier of the Euros X32, which you'll see in a few seconds, with the vehicles around the same area in the 2024 Coupes class testing video, which showcases all cars from that class except the new additions shown here, alongside any other DLC updates which will also feature at the top of the testing playlist. So I gotta say, this is probably one of the best updates for cars from a handling perspective. Lots of, just really nice to drive cars with unique handling characteristics and feeling different to each other, but also pleasant to drive as well, which certainly isn't always the case with this game over the years. For example, the Euros X32 here it's just really smooth, really nice, just a great car to drive, and even though it wasn't at the top tier of its class, at least in its normal form, we'll see its HSW form later on, it's just a lovely car to drive around with and race with when you're restricting to a set tier. The Coquette D1 here is also a beauty, and again a very unique handling car to drive, but also what you would kind of expect from an old sports classic car, and not unpleasant either. It's just, there's some really nice cars to drive in this DLC, and I think they've done a really good job. Although obviously with the Euros and the Coquette D1, they're both a little bit off the pace from the top of their classes. The same is true of the final drip feed car from this DLC, the Vorschlag hammer, which achieves a very satisfying lap time of 1 minute 7 seconds exactly, to go half a tenth of a second quicker than the Coquette D1, to put itself into the A tier for the sedans class, basically taking the spot of the Impaler SZ that's been removed alongside the Asterope GZ. Now, it does have a much better top speed than the Asterope and is just lovely to drive in general, so it's definitely the go-to car for A tier sedan racers, but it is more than 2 seconds per lap down on the top sedans. There aren't really that many cars from this DLC though that aren't on top pace, with the recent Dominator FX here sneaking up into the top tier of the muscle class with its grippy handling, and its enjoyment of the curbs and its boosting ability does give it that extra bit of competitiveness when you're racing in the top tier with it. But once again, quite a nice to drive car that's got its own unique characteristics in how that it performs. Now, only a fraction quicker for lap time than the Dominator FX was another drip feed car with the Castigator, and it's also another car that, while it didn't get the overall absolute top spot in the SUVs class, it is right up there in the top tier, and it will be competitive overall with SUV racers, especially depending on the situation. And it's also just the straight best pick when HSW is turned off or unavailable, because the two cars in front of it in the SUVs class are HSW upgraded cars. So yeah, just again another really nice car to drive, and the same is true of everything in this DLC, and it's really refreshing. Speaking of HSW, we do see our first HSW car here with the Euros X32, which, even though it was only 0.4 of a second per lap quicker than the Castigator, it did shoot straight to the top of the Coupes class and is easily the best to use in most situations. It's also, like I said earlier, just a really nice smooth driving experience, and while it's not as ridiculous as HSW cars are overall, it's possibly one of the best to race with alongside the Astron custom-made SUVs when it comes to HSW vehicles. We do take a big jump in lap time now to the sports cars though, with the Envisage breaking the 1 minute 1 second barrier to get into tier B for the sports class. Obviously the sports class has a huge number of cars now, well over 100, so to be even close to the top 10 and in tier B is actually makes it a very quick car. And when you consider that a 1 minute lap time would be one of the top tiers for the supercars class as well, there's definitely a blurring of the lines between, you know, the fastest supercars and the fastest sports cars these days. And in a lot of situations, sometimes you have a lot of sports cars that are faster than supercars, and the same is true of some of the other classes as well, like sports classics and muscle. The Paragon S also filtered into the B tier for the sports class. It went 0.4 of a second quicker than the Envisage for lap time, but it has a much better top speed, although with the Envisage being an electric vehicle it will have the better acceleration. So the B tier of sports has a lot of really interesting cars in it, like the Pariah for example, and many others. So it's one of the most interesting, very quick car classes and tiers to race with, I would say, at this point. Now the Niobe here is kind of ridiculous on its own to hit the A tier with a sub 1 minute lap time, and it makes itself probably the best car to use for A tier races, or when HSW isn't turned on in sports races overall, because even though you've got something like the Italy GTO which is quicker for lap time than the Niobe, it's only by a few tenths of a second, and the Niobe is just a much more pleasant and more manageable driving experience. So really, you're probably going to be wanting to use the Niobe in most sports car races on old gen PC, or if HSW is turned off. The Pipistrello can only get this lap time with its active spoiler, which is what I talked about in a previous video. If you add any other spoiler to this car, you will lose the traction bonus and get a worse lap time. Bit of a bug with this car. More details are in the video, which I'll link in the description. Nevertheless, and even in spite of its pitiful top speed, it is still good enough for second place across the DLC as a whole, and only beaten out by our other HSW car from this update, and we just saw it in the previous vehicle. It's the Niobe again. And that lap time and top speed combination that it has of a 55.3 second lap and then a 159.5 mile per hour top speed, it really does make it a force to be reckoned with overall. I would say I think it probably is overall the fastest car in the game and the best to use in most situations if you're concerned with speed. Obviously it's the fastest for sports class races already, but it's third overall for lap time behind the BR8 open wheeler and the HSW weaponized Ignis supercar, but neither of those cars have the nearly insane 160 miles per hour top speed that the Niobe does. In fact, they don't even come close. And while the Niobe is only second overall for top speed for cars, the number one spot is held by the Stinger TT, which is a pig to drive and horrible to maneuver. So in reality, this is easily the most complete car overall in the game, and in my opinion, the fastest in the most situations when looking across all metrics. To put it into perspective, the Niobe is 1/10 of a second behind the HSW weaponized Ignis for lap time, but has a 15 mile per hour top speed advantage, and it's 1 full second slower than the BR8, but it beats it for top speed by nearly 40 miles per hour. And while the HSW Stinger TT has 10 miles per hour on the top speed of the Niobe, it's a full 4 seconds per lap slower on the track. There really isn't anything that can compete with this car overall when you're looking at, you know, every single aspect of car performance. It's just the most complete car, and in my opinion, the fastest in most situations. But once again, as I've mentioned a few times throughout the course of this video, it's just nice to have some nice cars to drive. You know, every single car from this DLC has been a pleasant driving experience and unique in its own way. And when you compare it to, you know, previous DLCs, we've had all sorts of horrible times with advanced handling flags in the, certain years that ruined vehicles, and cars just having all sorts of different experiments put on them, and even things like the Stinger TT, which has that massive top speed, but the weird values for its slip angle, which make it very difficult to control, and just so many cars over the years, and so many DLCs where there's at least been 1 or 2 cars, at the very least anyway. Sometimes there's a lot more. There's at least been 1 or 2 cars that drive horribly, but it's very rare that every single car in a DLC is a nice car to drive, and we've had that with this one. So even though it's been a very short drip feed, and they've gotten the drip feed out of the way quite early, probably to do some marketing for GTA 6, I would imagine. And it's a relatively small number of cars if you take out the police vehicles which can't be raced, for example. It's at least, I would always take quality over quantity, and 12 nice to drive cars than 20 where 18 of them are absolutely horrible. So yeah, overall I think the Bottom Dollar Bounties DLC has been a pretty good one for cars, at least in terms of their handling characteristics and how nice they are to drive. So that's everything for this video. Please consider supporting on Patreon or become a YouTube member if you want to support this work and get some extra perks for doing so, such as early access to videos and other testing results. Also remember to read the description for more info, comment with your thoughts, like the video if you enjoyed or found it helpful, and subscribe for more. As always, thank you all so much for watching, and stay tuned for the further 2024 testing videos for off-roads, vans, open wheelers, police vehicles and more, and I'll see you next time.